The aim of our question time today is to quiz our panel on what new financial models could help kickstart stalled social housing projects, affordable housing projects, and could perhaps work better in the future than current models have in the past. We're also keen for you, obviously, our hopefully very eager audience, to contribute your own solutions and questions. But I've just got a few I'll throw out there just to get you warmed up. There's been quite a lot of talk from Sir Bob Kerslake and his team at the Homes Communities Agency, but has there been enough action over the last 3 or 4 months? You want to pick up on? And house builders and housing associations are again represented in our panel today. But did they get a bit too greedy perhaps when times were good, and have they learned their lessons now? You feel better, Sir Mark Easton? Mark.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Stuart. And yes, if I can give you my welcome to this Inside Housing Question Time in partnership with HQN. As Stuart said, my name's Mark Easton. I'm home editor at the BBC, which doesn't mean that I know anything about homes. I am your idiot referee for this morning. Last night I heard my colleague Robert Paston telling the world that the credit crunch may be coming to an end, but warning that the recession is only just beginning, and a good point perhaps for us to consider how the housing sector can weather the storms without sacrificing its principles, and as Stuart was suggesting, looking at creative ways of ensuring that social housing doesn't miss out. So we've had a budget promising £1 billion, we've had the Tories promising a new approach, but where does it leave the sector in terms of ensuring that we have enough homes of the right quality and of the right type? Getting it wrong doesn't bear thinking about. Well, perhaps it does. This morning, a Fabian Society pamphlet, you may have read this in your newspapers, claims that 30 years of poor housing policy has condemned millions of people to live under what they call social apartheid. The study condemns successive governments for pushing poorer people into social concentration camps set away from private housing, jobs and shops. Now, we have a truly first-class panel for you this morning to try and find some ways of avoiding those kind of mistakes. But before we invite them onto the stage, I'd like to introduce to you Sir Bob Kerslake.
I wanted to talk about really the agency's first 5 months, and interesting question you started with there. It's felt pretty busy to us, I have to say, as an agency in terms of taking actions. Focus particularly on what we've been doing to respond to the downturn, but actually spend a bit of time on the forward issues beyond this current period. And something I've been increasingly dwelling on is the distinction between what I've called tactical innovation, what we've been doing here and now to make things happen, and strategic innovation. Where do we want to be as we go through this period, and what are the long game issues that we should be attending to? And I think it's really quite important we work on both at the same time.
The FSA has a role to play in this, and its treatment of social housing lending, bearing in mind it is long-term committed funding backed by very short-term funding, and so you've got this tension. But against a history of zero losses in the sector. So I think perhaps some pressure could be brought upon the FSA in terms of its capital treatment. We've had this polarisation into 6 active lenders over the last 20 years, and those lenders now have something like an 85% market share. That's reduced from, I think there are about 30 active lenders at its peak. So we've now got 6. 3 of those have had government intervention. 1 is doing its best to avoid that at all counts. Another is very busy rescuing ailing building societies. And the final one, ABI, my organisation, supported by Santander and regulated by the Bank of Spain, of course, is in relatively good shape. But those 6 lenders in totality have something like 45 billion committed to this sector. And unfortunately, as a result of the cost of their funding going up, those loans are now uneconomic. And that's a big issue for this sector.
Now, when I was asked to join this panel, I thought what an excellent spread of representation there is. The man with the money, a developer, a private sector banker, a housing association, the local authority housing strategic role, indeed the local authority planning role, dare I say. But there's one sector that's not represented, and it's the sector that Bob alluded to in terms of people wanting to talk about all the noise in terms of the headlines on Inside Housing.
on the front page of Inside Housing, and the one that really wants to get into it. So today, just for a couple of minutes, crave my and your indulgence to act as a spokesperson for the local authority provider, Almo, and local authority-sponsored local housing company sector.
There's still a heartbeat in the market, and indeed some would say that over the last 3 months it's been a lot stronger, and that is certainly true. But before I talk about today, perhaps it's worth just reminding ourselves what's happened in just a really space of a year. It was probably last April that the housing reservations really fell off a cliff. If you look to the graph that the HBF produces weekly from all the volume house builders, is nearly a vertical line starting last April, and it really didn't recover. So reservations fell, some developers would say 50%, but it was 50 to 70%. That is a massive drop to any business. So how does anyone respond in that environment? Well, the simple thing is you stop building and you reduce your overhead. So the capacity of the house building sector has been halved in that year.
Steve talked about having had a difficult year or so, and I don't think there are many major developing housing associations who haven't had a little bit of a wake-up call over the last 12 months. They've learnt, if they didn't know already, that alongside the thrills and spills of being a major developer, there have been some attendant risks. And I think all of us are brushing up on our risk management strategies, and some of us have been exposed as having risk management strategies that were far from robust. And if they had crystallised into real difficulties, would have been difficulties for all of us, not just one or two of us. And I think the TSA are to be congratulated on the way they've helped manage that.
Lots of comments have been made by my fellow panellists, which I completely agree with, and I don't want to reiterate it because I know we're short of time and want to get into the questions. I'm going to just make a few comments really from the perspective of the local authorities' role in this debate. And I would start by saying if HCA see as their ambition is to create the opportunity, then I think it's local authorities' role to create the circumstances and the ambition for the opportunities to come forward. So I think local authorities have a real opportunity here to step up to the plate, really, in terms of responding to the current recession and the difficulties that panellists have identified. I think it is for local authorities to set the strategic context, to decide where to develop, what to develop, and more importantly, to work through for themselves what role they intend to play in this. And that will vary from area to area.